They hid it in plain sight, and no one saw it. The girl's voice was soft, almost lost beneath the low hum of the air conditioning and the quiet clicking of polished shoes against marble. But somehow it landed heavier than anything else in the room. 43 floors above Manhattan, inside a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Hudson, William Harrington stood at the head of a 12-foot conference table, his attention fixed on a multi-million-dollar acquisition contract projected across a glowing screen. The numbers were clean, precise, approved by 3 departments and reviewed by the best legal team money could buy. Everything about it looked perfect. That was the problem. The room smelled faintly of leather and espresso, the kind of place where decisions move markets and silence meant power. Around the table, executives in tailored suits leaned back in quiet confidence, their pens tapping lightly against folders, their eyes scanning columns they had already approved. No one noticed the girl standing near the far end of the table, small against the backdrop of glass and steel, her fingers gripping the strap of a worn canvas bag, her braids tied neatly with blue beads that caught the light every time she moved her head. Zoe Carter wasn't supposed to be there. She had come in quietly, following the assistant who had mistaken her for someone's child waiting for a ride, and no one had thought to ask her to leave. She hadn't said a word at first. She had just watched the numbers scroll, watched the way the room trusted them without question, watched the pattern. "Excuse me," she said again, a little louder this time, her voice steady in a way that didn't match her age. The conversation didn't stop immediately, but it shifted like a ripple moving across still water. A few heads turned, a few eyebrows lifted. William didn't look at her yet. "You're being robbed right now." That did it. The room went still. Not loud still, but the kind that pressed against your ears. One of the executives let out a short laugh, the kind people use when something doesn't make sense. Another glanced toward the door, expecting security to step in and fix the interruption. But no one moved. William slowly lifted his gaze from the screen and turned his head. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, measuring the way. He did with numbers, with risk, with people. Zoe didn't look away. She stepped closer to the table, her sneakers making the softest sound against the floor. "It's in the 3rd column," she said, pointing, not touching, just hovering her finger near the projection as if the numbers themselves might shift if she got too close. "That percentage doesn't match the base value." A murmur moved through the room, low and uncertain. The CFO adjusted his glasses, already preparing a response, but William raised a hand slightly, stopping him before he could speak. "What exactly are you seeing?" William asked, his voice calm, controlled, but different now, curious in a way it hadn't been a moment ago. Zoe tilted her head, studying the screen again, as if confirming something only she could see. "They didn't change the total," she said. "They change how you get there." The words hung in the air, quiet but sharp. Somewhere in the back of the room, a pen stopped tapping. The city outside kept moving. Cars flowing down avenues, boats cutting through the river. But inside that boardroom, time seemed to hesitate, balanced on the edge of a sentence no one was ready to finish. And for the first time since the meeting began, William Harrington wasn't looking at the deal. He was looking at the girl. The silence did not break all at once. It fractured in small, uneven pieces like glass under pressure. And the first crack came from a quiet chuckle near the far end of the table, a senior analyst shifting in his chair, shaking his head as if the moment needed to be corrected before it went too far, before it became something real. "That is not how financial modeling works," the chief financial officer said, his voice smooth and measured, the kind of voice built over years of presentations and quarterly calls, a voice that had never needed to explain itself twice. He adjusted his cufflinks, barely sparing Zoe a glance, as if acknowledging her too fully might give weight to what she had just said. "Those figures have been verified multiple times." A few heads nodded in agreement, relief slipping back into the room like air returning after being held too long. The tension loosened just enough for people to shift back into their roles, into certainty, into the comfort of systems that had never failed them before. But Zoe did not move. She stood exactly where she was, her small frame steady against the polished edge of the table, her eyes still fixed on the numbers glowing across the screen. "I did not say the math was wrong," she said quietly. That made the CFO pause, just for a second. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for William to see it. "Then what are you saying?" William asked, his voice lower now, not dismissive, not yet convinced, but no longer indifferent. Zoe took a small step forward, her gaze tracing the columns again, following the invisible path she had already mapped in her mind. "I'm saying the math is being used wrong," she replied. A faint shift moved through the room again, less confident this time, more cautious. The kind of shift that happens when certainty starts to feel slightly out of place. The CFO exhaled softly, a controlled breath, then turned toward William with a polite, almost amused smile. "Sir, with all due respect, we are discussing a multi-million-dollar acquisition. These calculations were handled by a full team of analysts." He gestured lightly toward the screen. "There is no hidden error." Zoe's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her bag, but her voice did not change. "It is not an error," she said. "It is a pattern." The word landed differently. Not technical, not defensive, just clear. William's eyes flickered back to the screen, then to Zoe again. "Show me," he said. The room went still again, but this time it was sharper, more focused, like everything had narrowed to a single point. The CFO straightened, the polite smile fading at the edges. "Sir, there is no need to entertain this," he said, his tone still controlled, but tighter now. "We are already behind schedule." William did not look at him. "Show me," he repeated, softer this time, but final. Zoe stepped closer to the projection, close enough now that the light brushed across her face, reflecting in her eyes. She lifted her hand again, hovering over the third column. "Right here," she said. "This percentage repeats every 4 entries, but the base number it is applied to changes." A few executives leaned forward, almost without realizing it. "That is standard scaling," someone muttered. Zoe shook her head slightly. "Not like this." She traced the sequence in the air, not touching the screen, just guiding attention. If you follow it backward, it lines up. But if you follow it forward, it drifts. Just a little each time. The room held its breath. "And when it drifts," she continued, her voice steady, "the difference does not disappear. It moves." No one laughed this time. William's expression did not change, but something behind it did, something quieter, sharper. "Where does it move?" he asked. Zoe looked at him, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "Into a place no one is checking," she said. And for the first time since the meeting began, the numbers on the screen no longer looked clean. The room did not move, but something inside it shifted, subtle and unmistakable, like a current beneath still water, and for the first time the executives were no longer looking at Zoe as an interruption. They were looking at the screen again, but differently now, not with confidence, but with questions they had not expected to ask. The chief financial officer straightened his posture, his fingers pressing lightly against the table as if grounding himself back into certainty. "That is not possible," he said, though his tone had lost a fraction of its earlier ease. "Every allocation pathway has been audited." Zoe did not respond right away. She studied the projection again, her eyes moving quickly, not randomly, but with purpose, connecting pieces that had never been meant to be seen together. "It is not in the main pathway," she said quietly. "That is why it passed." William's gaze sharpened. "Then where is it?" he asked. Zoe lifted her hand again, but this time she did not point at the numbers everyone had been watching. She shifted slightly to the right, toward a smaller section of the projection, one that had been minimized earlier, labeled as a supporting breakdown, something secondary, something safe. "There," she said. A few executives leaned forward instinctively, their chairs creaking softly against the polished floor. The CFO followed their gaze, his jaw tightening just slightly before he forced a composed expression back into place. "That section is irrelevant to the primary valuation," he said quickly. "It is a distribution summary, nothing more." Zoe shook her head, small but certain. "It is where the difference goes." The words landed heavier this time, not because they were louder, but because they were harder to dismiss. William stepped closer to the screen, his reflection faintly visible in the glass behind it, merging with the numbers in a way that made it difficult to separate man from decision. "Expand that section," he said. No one moved for a second. Then one of the junior analysts, seated near the edge of the table, hesitated before reaching for his keyboard. His fingers hovered, then pressed a key. The projection shifted. The smaller section grew, numbers rearranging themselves in a focus, columns stretching wider, rows revealing more detail than anyone had bothered to examine closely before. The room leaned in. Zoe did not. She had already seen it. "Start from the top," William said. The analyst scrolled slowly, the soft click of keys echoing louder than it should have. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The numbers aligned, clean and orderly, exactly as expected. A few executives exhaled quietly, tension easing again, ready to return to certainty. Then Zoe spoke. "Stop." The analyst froze mid-scroll. "Go back 3 lines," she said. He did. "Now compare that percentage to the 4 rows above it." The analyst frowned slightly, his eyes moving between the entries. "They are the same," he said. "They should not be," Zoe replied. A pause. "Why not?" someone asked. Zoe's voice remained calm. "Because the base value changed." The analyst's fingers moved again, pulling up the corresponding figures. His posture shifted almost immediately, his shoulders tightening as he leaned closer to the screen. "Wait," he murmured. The word was quiet, but it carried. William did not blink. "Explain," he said. The analyst swallowed, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "The percentage is fixed," he said slowly, but the base number increased. He tapped the screen lightly. "That means the output should be higher." Silence. "But it is not," Zoe finished for him. The room held still again, but this time it felt different, heavier, like the air itself had thickened. William's eyes moved from the screen to the CFO. The man did not speak immediately. He adjusted his glasses again, slower now, buying time in a way no one had seen him do before. "It could be a formatting delay," he said finally, though the explanation sounded thinner than it had in his head. Zoe's gaze did not leave the numbers. "It happens again," she said. "Scroll down." The analyst did. And this time, more than one person leaned forward. The pattern was there, subtle, repeating, small enough to ignore, large enough to matter. And for the first time, the room understood what Zoe had meant. The numbers were not wrong. They were being guided, and someone had decided exactly where they would end up. No one spoke for a long moment, not because they did not have words, but because every word suddenly felt like a risk, like stepping on a ground that was no longer guaranteed to hold. The screen glowed brighter now, or maybe it only seemed that way. The numbers no longer neutral, no longer harmless, each row carrying a quiet question no one in the room had prepared to answer. William did not move away from the display. His posture remained steady, but his focus had narrowed, sharpened into something far more precise than before. "Run the full sequence," he said. The analyst hesitated, then began typing, pulling up additional data layers, cross-referencing entries that had never been viewed together in real time. The soft rhythm of keys filled the silence, uneven now, less confident. "This is unnecessary," the chief financial officer said, his tone firm but controlled, though the edges of it had started to fray. "We are diverting from the core objective of this meeting." William did not turn. "The core objective," he replied evenly, "is accuracy." That word landed heavier than any argument. The CFO's jaw tightened. "And we have accuracy," he insisted. Zoe's voice came quietly, but it cut through the tension with clarity. "Then why does it keep happening?" Every eye shifted again. She stepped slightly closer, her gaze still anchored to the projection. "Scroll to the next block," she said. The analyst obeyed without waiting for confirmation. The data shifted again. Another set of numbers. Another clean structure. Another pattern waiting to be seen. "There," Zoe said. "Same percentages. Different base. Same result." The analyst leaned in closer, his breath catching just slightly. "That cannot be right," he murmured. He ran the calculation manually this time, fingers moving faster, almost urgent. A few executives stood from their chairs without realizing it, drawn toward the screen like gravity had changed inside the room. "It is off," the analyst said louder now, "by 2.3%. The number sounded small when spoken, but it did not feel small. Not in a deal this size. Not in a room like this. William's eyes flicked once, toward the CFO, then back to the screen. "Convert that," he said. The analyst swallowed. "Approximately $8.6 million, he replied. The room exhaled all at once, but there was no relief in it, only weight. The CFO let out a short breath, almost a laugh, though it carried no humor. "This is a rounding discrepancy," he said quickly. "Minor. Completely within acceptable thresholds." Zoe shook her head again. "Not if it repeats." Silence returned, deeper this time. William spoke without raising his voice. "Does it repeat?" The analyst hesitated, then scrolled further. "Once. Twice. 3 times. Each instance small. Each instance consistent. Each instance moving in the same direction." "Yes," he said finally. The word did not echo, but it settled over everything. The CFO stepped forward now, his composure tightening into something more rigid. "Patterns can appear where none exist," he said, his voice sharper than before. "That does not mean there is intent." Zoe turned her head slightly, looking at him for the first time since she had started speaking. Her expression did not change. "It is always the same direction," she said. "That means someone chose it." The room did not react with noise this time. It reacted with stillness. William finally turned away from the screen, slowly, deliberately, his attention shifting fully to the man beside him. The distance between them felt different now, not physical, but something deeper, something harder to measure. "Who reviewed this section?" William asked. The question was simple. The answer was not. The CFO held his gaze, steady for a moment, then just slightly too long. "My team," he said. William did not blink. "Which means you." A pause. Not long. Just enough. And in that pause, something invisible inside the room shifted again. Not uncertainty this time, but alignment, as if every person present understood, without being told, that this was no longer about numbers alone. William's voice lowered, calm, controlled, but unmistakably different. "We are not moving forward," he said. The words settled like a final line drawn across the table. Behind him, the city continued its motion, unaware. But inside that room, everything had just stopped. And at the edge of it all stood a girl who had seen what no one else had thought to question. The words did not echo, but they stayed, suspended in the air like something irreversible, and for a brief moment no one in the room seemed to remember how meetings were supposed to continue after a line like that had been drawn. William Harrington did not raise his voice, did not repeat himself, yet the authority in his decision settled deeper than any argument could have. Chairs remained half-turned, laptops open, pens resting mid-note, as if time itself had paused to catch up with what had just happened. The chief financial officer stood still, his posture controlled but rigid, the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from calculation. "We need to be careful," he said finally, choosing each word with precision. "Halting a deal of this scale based on an unverified interpretation introduces unnecessary risk." William turned his head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. "Continuing, it introduces a greater one," he replied. The exchange was quiet, but it shifted the balance in the room completely. Zoe had not moved. She stood just off the edge of the table, her eyes no longer scanning the screen, but watching the people now, the way they responded, the way their certainty had started to unravel in small, almost invisible ways. She did not look proud. She did not look afraid. She looked focused, as if she understood that this part mattered just as much as the numbers. "Run a full audit on every linked account," William said, his attention returning to the analyst. "I want real-time verification, not summaries." The analyst nodded quickly, already typing, his earlier hesitation replaced by urgency. Windows opened across the screen, layers of financial pathways expanding outward, connections forming a web that had never been displayed all at once. The room leaned in again, but this time not with confidence, with caution. Sir, the CFO interjected, stepping forward. This is not standard procedure. These systems are not designed for live dissection at this level. William did not look at him. Then adjust them, he said. The simplicity of the response left no space for negotiation. The CFO's expression tightened, just briefly, before smoothing again into something more controlled, more careful. He stepped back, but not fully, remaining close enough to observe, to measure, to anticipate. Zoe's gaze shifted back to the screen as the data expanded. More numbers, more pathways, more places for small differences to hide. There, she said again, her voice steady. The analyst followed her direction, isolating another segment. The pattern appeared again. Subtle, consistent, intentional. It is branching, the analyst said under his breath. Not random. William's eyes narrowed slightly. Trace it, he said. The analyst hesitated for only a fraction of a second before executing the command. The system responded with a delay, then began mapping the flow, line by line, transaction by transaction, until the scattered discrepancies started to align into something clearer, something structured. The room grew quieter with each second. It leads somewhere, the analyst said, his voice lower now, as if speaking too loudly might disrupt what was being uncovered. The CFO stepped closer again, his tone sharper. All large systems lead somewhere. That does not imply wrongdoing. Zoe did not look at him. This one avoids the same checkpoints every time, she said. That is not an accident. The analyst's hands moved faster now, pulling up endpoint data, following the path to its conclusion. A final window opened. A single account appeared on the screen. Unfamiliar, isolated, precise. The room did not react immediately. It absorbed. It processed. It understood. William stared at the account number for a long moment, then spoke without taking his eyes off it. Who authorized this channel? No one answered right away. The question did not move across the room. It stayed heavy and direct. The CFO's silence lasted just a fraction too long. And in that fraction, the room understood something it had not been told. William turned slowly, his attention settling fully on him now. Not questioning, not guessing, seeing. We are not guessing anymore, William said, his voice calm, but final in a way that could not be undone. And for the first time since the meeting began, the power in the room had shifted completely, not toward the numbers, not toward the system, but toward the truth that a child had been the only one willing to see. The question did not fade. It deepened, pressing into the room with a weight that no one could redirect, and the silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was revealing, stretching just long enough to expose what hesitation often tries to hide. The account number remained on the screen, still and undeniable, a single line of data that had quietly redirected millions of dollars without ever raising an alarm. William did not look away from the chief financial officer. He did not need to raise his voice because the room had already aligned itself around the answer that had not yet been spoken. Ask the question, William said, calm and precise. The CFO adjusted his glasses again, slower this time, his usual rhythm disrupted in a way that could not be disguised. There are multiple authorization layers in place, he replied, carefully measured, as if constructing distance between himself and the system. No single individual controls a pathway like that. Zoe's voice came quietly, but it landed exactly where it needed to. But someone designed it. The words did not accuse. They clarified. The analyst glanced between the screen and the CFO, his hands hovering above the keyboard, waiting, uncertain which direction the room would move next. William took a single step closer to the table, his reflection now fully aligned with the data on the screen. Trace the authorization chain, he said. The analyst nodded and began typing again, pulling up internal approval logs, timestamps, digital signatures, each layer revealing another step in a process that had once been invisible. The system responded with a slight delay, then displayed a structured list, names, times, approvals, all clean, all verified. At first glance, everything appeared correct. That was what made it effective. It is fragmented, the analyst said, scanning the entries. Each approval looks independent. Zoe stepped slightly closer, her eyes moving quickly across the screen. Not independent, she said. Sequenced. The analyst blinked, then looked again, this time not at the approvals themselves, but at the timing between them. His posture shifted almost immediately. They are spaced, he said slowly. Exactly 4 minutes apart. A quiet ripple moved through the room. For minutes. Not random. Not accidental. Controlled. William's gaze did not move. Continue, he said. The analyst followed the chain downward, each approval linked to a different department, a different name, a different system entry. These are all valid credentials, he added. No flags, no overrides. The CFO exhaled softly, regaining a fraction of his earlier composure. That confirms my point, he said. There is no breach here. The system is functioning as designed. Zoe shook her head, her expression unchanged. Yes, she said. That is the problem. The room stilled again. If it was a mistake, it would look messy, she continued. This is clean. William's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt, but in recognition. Where does the sequence begin? He asked. The analyst scrolled to the top of the chain, isolating the first approval in the sequence. A name appeared, then a second, then a third. All different, all legitimate, but the timestamps remained consistent. For minutes, for minutes, for minutes. It loops, the analyst said quietly. Every sequence starts after the same internal trigger. William's voice remained steady. Identify the trigger. The analyst hesitated for only a moment before executing the command. The system processed, then highlighted a single initiating action, a background authorization event tied to a master control setting. The label appeared on the screen, small, technical, easy to overlook. But now was the only thing anyone could see. The room leaned in without realizing it. That is an administrative override, the analyst said, his voice lower now. It should not activate automatically. William finally shifted his gaze, not to the screen, but back to the CFO. The distance between them felt smaller now, but heavier. Who has access to that level? William asked. The question was simple again. But this time, the room already knew the answer would not be. The CFO held his gaze, steady for a moment, then just slightly too controlled. Executive clearance, he said. A pause. William did not look away. Which means the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had just been uncovered, every number, every pattern, every decision that had led to this exact moment. And standing just behind it all was a girl who had never touched the system, never needed to, because she had seen what it was trying to hide. The silence did not need to be filled anymore. It had already answered the question before anyone dared to speak it aloud. And in that stillness, every person in the room understood that the system had not failed. It had been guided carefully, deliberately, and with a level of precision that only someone inside it could achieve. William did not move, but the way he looked at the chief financial officer had changed, no longer searching, no longer questioning, but aligning the pieces that had already been revealed. Executive clearance, William repeated, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that settled across the entire room. The CFO gave a small nod, controlled, measured, as if acknowledging a technical truth rather than a personal one. Yes, he said, that level is restricted. Zoe's voice came softly, but it did not hesitate. How many people have it? The question was simple, but it shifted the focus again, narrowing the possibilities, turning abstraction into something countable, something real. The CFO paused just briefly. A limited number, he replied. William's gaze did not leave him. Define limited. Another pause. Shorter this time, but enough. 3, the CFO said. The room absorbed the number immediately. 3. Not a system. Not a network. 3 people. The analyst's fingers hovered over the keyboard, waiting for direction, his earlier confidence replaced by a quiet urgency. William spoke without looking away. List them. The analyst nodded and began typing, pulling up the executive access registry, a secure panel that rarely needed to be opened in a setting like this. The system processed, then displayed the names one by one, clean and official, each tied to a level of authority that few ever reached. The first name appeared, a senior operations director. The second, a compliance executive. The third name took a fraction longer to load, as if even the system understood the weight it carried. Then it appeared, the chief financial officer. The room did not react with noise. It reacted with stillness, deeper than before, heavier, undeniable. The CFO did not look at the screen. He looked at William. That does not prove involvement, he said, his voice steady, but tighter now, the control more visible than before. Access does not equal action. Zoe tilted her head slightly, her eyes moving between the names and the timestamps that still lingered on the side of the display. Then check the timing, she said. The analyst did not wait for instruction this time. He overlaid the authorization sequence with the executive access logs, aligning entries, matching moments, building a timeline that had never been meant to be seen in one place. The screen filled with data, but now it was no longer overwhelming. It was narrowing, converging, pointing. There, the analyst said, his voice low. Every initiating trigger aligns with a single access point. William's expression did not change, but the room felt it. Which one? He asked. The analyst hesitated for a fraction of a second, then highlighted the line. The CFO's access ID. The air in the room shifted again, not with shock this time, but with recognition, as if everything had been moving toward this exact moment from the beginning. The CFO exhaled slowly, adjusting his stance, his composure tightening into something sharper, more deliberate. Correlation is not confirmation, he said. You're drawing conclusions from incomplete data. Zoe did not argue. She simply looked back at the screen, then at William. Then complete it, she said. The words were quiet, but they carried forward, landing exactly where they needed to. William held her gaze for a brief moment. Something unspoken passing between them. Something that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with clarity. Then he turned back to the analyst. Pull the manual override logs, he said. The analyst nodded, his hands moving quickly, the system responding, layers opening, deeper access points revealing themselves, logs that were rarely touched, rarely questioned. The CFO remained still, but the space around him had changed, no longer defined by position, but by the weight of what was about to be confirmed. The screen refreshed. A final set of entries appeared. Clean, precise, undeniable. And in the center of it all, the same identifier, repeated, consistent, controlled. The room did not need an explanation anymore. It needed a decision. And for the first time since the meeting began, every person present understood that the numbers had never been the most important thing in the room. The truth was, the screen did not flicker. It held steady, almost indifferent to the weight of what it was now showing. But the room was no longer the same. Every person inside it now standing at the edge of something that could not be undone, something that had already been revealed whether they chose to accept it or not. The identifier remained at the center of the display, repeated across every manual override log, aligned with every initiating trigger, clean in its precision and impossible to ignore. No one spoke at first. They did not need to. The pattern had already spoken for itself. William Harrington stood still, his gaze fixed on the screen for a moment longer before shifting, slowly, deliberately, toward the chief financial officer. There was no hesitation left in his expression, no uncertainty, only clarity. Say it, William said quietly. The words were not loud, but they carried further than anything else that had been spoken that morning. The CFO did not respond immediately. He remained composed, his posture straight, his hands resting lightly against the table as if anchoring himself to something solid. There are still variables unaccounted for, he said, his voice measured, controlled, but no longer effortless. This could be a misinterpretation of system behavior. Zoe did not interrupt. She simply stepped closer to the screen again, her eyes tracing the logs one more time, not searching now, but confirming. Then why is it always you? She asked. The question did not accuse. It clarified. The room did not react with sound. It reacted with stillness, sharper than before, because now there was no abstraction left, no system to hide behind, Only a name, a pattern, and a choice. The CFO's jaw tightened slightly, the smallest shift, but enough. You are allowing a child to guide a conclusion that requires context, he said, turning his attention briefly toward William. That is not responsible leadership. William did not look away from him. Ignoring what is in front of me would not be leadership either, he replied. The exchange did not escalate. It did not need to. The room had already moved past argument. The analyst's hands hovered above the keyboard again, waiting, uncertain whether to continue or stop, as if the next command might change more than just what appeared on the screen. Zoe looked at the data again, then back at William, her voice steady. There is one more thing, she said. William gave a small nod. Show me. Zoe pointed, not at the logs this time, but at a small timestamp detail that sat quietly beside each override entry, something most people would never think to question. The time is always the same distance from the approval before it, she said. The analyst leaned in, adjusting the display, isolating the timestamps, aligning them in a sequence. The pattern appeared instantly. For minutes. For minutes. For minutes. But now there was something else. There is a delay before the first trigger, the analyst said, his voice lower. Exactly 12 minutes. Zoe nodded slightly. That is when the system refreshes external data, she said. It is the only moment everything resets at once. The room absorbed that quietly. William's gaze sharpened again. So the override is timed to the reset, he said. It hides inside the update. Zoe met his eyes. Yes. The CFO exhaled slowly, his composure tightening further, the calm now more deliberate than natural. Even if that were true, he said, it does not establish intent. Zoe did not argue. She simply looked at the screen again, then spoke with the same calm certainty she had carried from the beginning. Intent is choosing the same moment every time, she said. The words settled deeper than anything else had. William did not look at the screen anymore. He looked at the man standing across from him, not as a colleague, not as an executive, but as someone whose decisions had just been brought into the light. The city outside continued to move, unaware, distant, irrelevant to what had just shifted inside that room. William's voice, when he spoke again, was calm, controlled, and final. We are done with explanations, he said. And in that moment, the truth was no longer something being uncovered. It was something that had already arrived. The room did not breathe the same way anymore, as if the air itself had changed direction, pulled toward a truth that could no longer be redirected or softened. And for a moment no one moved, because movement would mean accepting what had already been made clear. William Harrington stood at the center of it, not raised above the others, but undeniably holding the weight of the decision that was forming, his eyes steady, no longer searching for confirmation, but measuring what came next. The chief financial officer remained still, his composure intact on the surface, but thinner now, stretched across a reality that had shifted beyond control. You are making a decision based on interpretation, he said, his voice calm but sharpened, each word placed carefully, as if precision alone could restore balance. There are still layers you have not examined. William did not look at the screen. He did not need to anymore. Then we will examine them, he said. The simplicity of the response did not escalate the tension. It anchored it, turning uncertainty into direction. The analyst straightened slightly, his hands already moving again, pulling deeper system logs, cross-referencing back-end triggers, building a structure of data that no longer felt abstract but increasingly personal. The screen shifted once more, layers unfolding, timelines extending, each connection now part of a larger picture that was beginning to form with undeniable clarity. Zoe watched quietly, her posture unchanged, her attention moving with the data, as if she had already walked this path before the system ever revealed it. She did not rush. She did not interrupt. She waited for the moment where everything aligned. There, she said softly. The analyst followed her gaze, isolating a new set of entries, smaller, less obvious, buried beneath layers that had never been questioned. What is that? One of the executives asked, his voice lower now, stripped of earlier confidence. The analyst leaned closer, adjusting the display. It is a mirror log, he said, a secondary record of the same transactions. A ripple moved through the room. Why would there be a mirror? Someone else asked. Zoe answered before anyone else could. So it looks balanced. The words settled heavily. William's eyes narrowed slightly. Show me the difference, he said. The analyst aligned the primary and mirror logs side by side, numbers matching at first glance, columns reflecting each other with near perfection. For a second, it almost seemed as if the system was correcting itself. Then the analyst's expression changed. Wait, he said quietly. His fingers moved again, highlighting a small variation, barely visible, a fraction of fraction, repeated across multiple entries. It is not exact, he said. The room leaned in again, drawn toward the smallest discrepancy. The mirror rounds up, he continued. The primary rounds down. Silence followed. Not confusion. Understanding. Zoe nodded slightly. That is how it hides, she said. One side loses. One side gains. And the total still looks right. William's gaze returned to the CFO, slower this time, more deliberate, as if every step of the process had led exactly here. Where does the gain go? He asked. The CFO did not answer immediately. His posture remained steady, but the space around him had changed, no longer supported by certainty, but by the absence of it. It is redistributed, he said finally. Standard allocation. Zoe shook her head, her voice still calm, still certain. No, she said. It is collected. The word landed differently. Not technical, not neutral, final. The analyst traced the mirror adjustments, following the accumulation, line by line, until the scattered fractions began to gather, forming something larger, something intentional. The endpoint appeared again. The same account, the same place, the same destination that had been quietly receiving what no one else had noticed was missing. The room did not need to react anymore. It understood. William did not look away this time. You built two systems, he said, his voice low, controlled, but carrying a weight that filled the space between them. One to show, one to take. The CFO held his gaze, his expression no longer attempting to dismiss, but to contain. You are oversimplifying a complex structure, he replied. But the words did not carry the same strength anymore. Because the structure was no longer complex. It had been made simple. And, standing at the edge of it all, was a girl who had never needed access, never needed authority, because she had seen the only thing that mattered, the pattern. And once seen, it could not be unseen. The truth did not arrive like a crash. It settled, heavy and irreversible, pressing into every corner of the room until there was no space left for interpretation, no distance left between what had been suspected and what had now been clearly seen. The screen continued to glow, numbers still moving slightly as the system updated in real time. But no one was watching the numbers anymore. They were watching the meaning behind them. William Harrington stood motionless for a moment, his gaze fixed on the mirrored logs, on the fractions that had quietly built something far larger than anyone had intended to notice. Then he moved, slowly, deliberately, turning his full attention toward the chief financial officer. How long? William asked. The question was quiet, but it carried more weight than any accusation. The CFO did not answer immediately. His posture remained straight, his expression controlled, but the silence that followed was no longer strategic. It was revealing. This system has been in place since the early restructuring phase, he said finally, choosing his words with care, each one measured, each one incomplete. A subtle shift moved through the room. Early restructuring. That meant years. William's expression did not change, but something behind it did, something colder, more precise. And no one noticed, he said. It was not a question. Zoe's voice came softly, but it landed with clarity. They did not look for it. The words did not blame. They explained. The analyst's hands hovered again, then continued, pulling historical data, extending the timeline backward, month by month, year by year, the pattern repeating with quiet consistency, small amounts accumulating into something far beyond small. It compounds, the analyst said under his breath, almost to himself. It always does, Zoe replied. The room absorbed that without comment. William, stepped closer to the table, his reflection merging again with the screen, with the data, with the evidence that no longer needed interpretation. Total amount, he said. The analyst hesitated, then executed the calculation, the system processing for a moment longer than usual, as if even it understood the weight of what it was about to reveal. The number appeared, not dramatic in format, not highlighted, just there, but it changed everything. A quiet exhale moved through the room, not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable. The CFO did not look at the screen. He looked at William. "You are reacting to a surface analysis," he said, his voice still controlled, but thinner now, stretched across a reality that no longer supported it. These funds are redistributed across multiple channels. There is no personal gain here. Zoe tilted her head slightly, her eyes returning to the endpoint account, to the place where everything converged. "Then why does it always end there?" she asked. The question did not need force. It only needed presence. The analyst did not wait this time. He isolated the endpoint again, tracing every pathway back to it, confirming what had already been seen, what had already been understood. The CFO's access, the timing, the pattern, the accumulation. William did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You built a system that no one would question," he said, his tone calm, but final. "And you counted on that." The CFO's composure held for a moment longer, then shifted, not breaking, but changing, tightening into something more deliberate, more guarded. "I built a system that functions efficiently," he replied. "If there are discrepancies, they can be corrected." Zoe shook her head gently. "It is not a mistake," she said. "It is a choice." The words settled deeper than anything else had. The room did not move. It did not react. It understood. William's gaze did not leave the man in front of him. "We are not correcting this," he said quietly. "We are stopping it." The statement did not need explanation. It did not need approval. It was already done. The city outside continued its rhythm, unaware, distant, unchanged. But inside that room, everything had shifted, not because of power, not because of authority, but because one person had been willing to see what everyone else had trusted without question. And now that it had been seen, there was no returning to what it had been before. No one rushed to speak after that, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to soften, and the silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was settled, like a decision that had already been made long before it was spoken out loud. The screen still held the final number, the accumulated total that had grown quietly over time, but it no longer demanded attention. It had already done its work. William Harrington stood still for a moment longer, then reached forward and closed the projection with a single motion. The light shifted instantly, the room dimming slightly as the numbers disappeared, leaving only reflections in the glass walls and the quiet presence of the people who had just witnessed something irreversible. "This ends now," William said. His voice was calm, but it carried a clarity that left no room for interpretation. The chief financial officer did not respond right away. He remained composed, his posture unchanged, but the absence of the screen had shifted the focus entirely onto him, onto the space he occupied, onto the decisions that had brought everything to this point. "You are acting quickly," he said finally, his tone measured but no longer smooth. "There are procedures for situations like this." William looked at him, not with anger, not with hesitation, but with a steady certainty that had replaced everything else. "And they will be followed," he replied. "Starting now." The words did not escalate. They finalized. Around the table, executives exchanged brief glances, not openly, not dramatically, but enough to acknowledge what had just happened, what was about to follow, and where they now stood within it. The analyst slowly pulled his hands away from the keyboard. The system no longer needed, the truth no longer hidden inside layers of data. Zoe remained where she was, quiet, observant, her small figure still against the edge of the table, but now the center of something far larger than she had entered. She did not look at the others. She looked at William. "Will they fix it?" she asked softly. The question was simple, but it cut through everything else. William turned toward her, his expression shifting for the first time, not losing its strength, but gaining something else, something quieter. Yes, he said. We will. Zoe nodded slightly, as if that was all she needed to hear. She did not ask for more. She did not expect more. Around them, the room began to move again, not back to normal, but forward into something new, something that required action instead of assumption. One of the executives stepped toward the door, already reaching for his phone. Another gathered documents that were no longer valid, their earlier confidence replaced by a focused urgency. The chief financial officer remained still for a moment longer, then adjusted his jacket, his movements precise, controlled, as if maintaining order in appearance could still hold something together beneath it. You are making a significant shift based on one interpretation, he said, his voice lower now. William did not step back. No, he replied. I am making it based on what is real. The words did not rise. They settled. The distance between them no longer felt like hierarchy. It felt like truth separating itself from everything that had tried to obscure it. The CFO held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in recognition that the direction of the room had changed and would not return. Without another word, he turned slightly, no longer at the center, no longer defining the space. And in that quiet shift, the power he had carried dissolved, not dramatically, but completely. Zoe watched it happen without expression, without satisfaction, only understanding. She looked back toward the window, where the city stretched out beyond the glass, unchanged, unaware, still moving in its own rhythm. Then she looked back at William. You did not see it, she said gently. It was not a criticism. It was a truth. William did not look away from her. No, he said. I did not. A brief pause. Then quieter, but no less certain, but you did. And in that moment, the room, the company, the system itself seemed to shift around that single fact, that the clearest vision had not come from power or experience or authority, but from someone who had simply been willing to look differently, to question what others had accepted, and to speak when silence would have been easier. And now, because she had, everything was different. The room did not return to what it had been. It moved forward into something quieter, more deliberate, as if every person inside it had become aware of how easily certainty could be built on something that had never been fully questioned. The glass walls reflected a different kind of stillness now, not the polished calm of control, but the measured quiet of people recalibrating what they trusted and how they saw. William Harrington stepped away from the table, not retreating, but shifting into motion with purpose, his attention no longer fixed on the past few minutes, but on what would come next. Lock every channel connected to that pathway, he said, his voice steady, precise. No transfers, no rerouting. Nothing moves without direct authorization. The analyst nodded immediately, his hands returning to the keyboard, this time with clarity instead of hesitation, executing commands that sealed the system piece by piece, closing the gaps that had once been invisible. The screen came back to life briefly, not with numbers, but with confirmations, access points closing, permissions tightening, pathways going dark one after another. It did not look dramatic. It looked final. The executives watched in silence, not as observers anymore, but as participants in something that required them to adjust, to respond, to act with a level of attention that had been missing before. The chief financial officer remained near the table, no longer central, no longer directing the rhythm of the room, but not yet removed from it either. His posture stayed composed, but the control he once held had shifted into something else, something more contained, more isolated. This will create disruption, he said, his tone even but quieter than before. There will be consequences. William did not stop moving. There already are, he replied. The words did not rise. They settled, firm and grounded in what had already been revealed. Zoe stood near the edge of the room now, slightly back from the table, her small canvas bag still held against her side, her eyes following the changes on the screen as each lock engaged, each pathway closed. She did not look overwhelmed. She looked attentive, as if she understood that this part mattered just as much as the discovery itself. Will it stay fixed? She asked softly. The question carried no doubt, only clarity. William turned toward her again, his expression steady, but warmer now, not in softness, but in recognition. "It will be watched," he said. Zoe nodded once, as if that answer was enough. She glanced briefly at the darkened sections of the system, display, then back toward the window, where the city continued to move in its steady rhythm, unaware of the quiet correction taking place above it. Behind her, one of the executives stepped forward, gathering the documents that had once defined the meeting, now irrelevant, their printed numbers no longer aligned with reality. Another began speaking in low tones into a phone, initiating reviews, audits, processes that would extend far beyond this room. The shift was not loud. It was precise. The chief financial officer exhaled slowly, adjusting his jacket again, his movements still controlled, but now separated from the direction of the room. "You believe this resolves the issue," he said, his voice carrying a final attempt at distance. William met his gaze, not with tension, but with certainty. "No," he said, "it reveals it." The distinction settled deeply, leaving no room for confusion. The CFO held that gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, not in agreement, but an acknowledgement that the structure he had relied on was no longer intact. He stepped back, not forced, not removed, but no longer part of the center that had defined him before. Zoe watched the exchange without expression, her understanding quiet, steady, complete. She shifted her weight slightly, then looked back at William. "You will not miss it again," she said. It was not a question. William paused, just for a moment, then answered with the same calm certainty he had carried through every decision since the truth had surfaced. "No," he said, "I will not." And in that moment, the room settled into something new. Not perfect, not untouched, but aware, grounded in a clarity that had not been there before, all because one voice had been willing to speak when everyone else had trusted what they were given, and one person had chosen to listen when it mattered most. The room did not feel like a boardroom anymore. It felt like a place where something had been reset, not erased, but realigned, as if every surface now carried the quiet awareness of what had almost been missed and what had been seen just in time. The systems had been locked, the pathways sealed, the process already moving beyond this moment into audits and reviews that would stretch far beyond the glass walls surrounding them. But inside the room, something more subtle remained, something that could not be written into reports or summarized in numbers. William Harrington stood near the window now, the city stretching out beneath him, steady and distant, unchanged by what had just happened above it. For a long moment, he did not speak. He simply looked out, as if measuring the space between what he had built and what he had almost lost without ever realizing it. Behind him, the room had quieted into a different kind of stillness, not tense, not uncertain, but reflective, each person recalibrating their place within a system that had just revealed its hidden fracture. Zoe stood a few feet away, her small frame steady, her canvas bag still resting against her side, her eyes moving not toward the city, but toward William, as if she understood that this moment mattered just as much as everything that had come before it. He turned back slowly, his attention settling on her, not as an interruption anymore, not even as a surprise, but as something far more significant, something he had not known he needed until she had spoken. "Why did you say something?" he asked. The question was quiet, not demanding, not testing, just real. Zoe did not answer immediately. She glanced briefly at the table, now cleared of its earlier purpose, then back at him. "Because it did not match," she said. William's expression shifted slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition of the simplicity behind something so complex. "A lot of things do not match," he said. Zoe nodded gently. "But people stop looking," she replied. The words settled softly, but they carried further than anything else that had been said. William held her gaze, understanding something beyond the numbers, beyond the system, something about how easily trust could replace attention, and how dangerous that could become when no one chose to question it. "And you did not stop," he said. Zoe shook her head. "No," she answered. A brief silence followed, not empty, but full, as if the room itself was holding onto that exchange, letting it settle into something lasting. William took a step closer, his posture still composed, still defined by the same control that had built everything around him, but now carrying something else, something quieter, something more aware. "What is your name?" he asked. "Zoe Carter," she said. He nodded once, as if committing it to memory in a way he rarely needed to. "Zoe," he repeated, then paused for just a moment before continuing. "You saw what an entire room full of people did not." Zoe did not react with pride. She simply looked at him, her expression calm. "They were not looking for it," she said again. William exhaled slowly, a breath that felt different from the ones he had taken earlier, less controlled, more grounded. "I should have been," he said. Zoe tilted her head slightly. "You will be now," she replied. It was not encouragement. It was certainty. The room remained quiet around them, but no longer disconnected, no longer unaware. The executives who had stayed behind stood at a distance, not interrupting, not speaking, but listening, understanding that what had just happened was not only about what had been uncovered, but about what had been learned. William gave a small nod, not formal, not distant, but genuine. "Yes," he said, "I will." Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unchanged, but inside that room, something had shifted permanently, not in the systems, not in the numbers, but in the way they would be seen from this moment forward. And at the center of that shift stood a girl who had not come with power, or authority, or expectation, only with the willingness to notice what did not belong and the courage to say it out loud. And because she did, everything else followed.